Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon for our data science mini lecture. We have a few people in the waiting room still. Everyone is currently filing in, so we will just give a second for a few more people to join. Okay, again, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We have a mini lecture for you for the first part of our session. Then David Fiorentini is going to introduce himself and run you through a talk about federal data infrastructure. And then we'll have time for questions. And then at the end of the hour, we will run through some of the application process if you're interested in applying to join us in the program. So I will pass it over to David.
Fantastic. Thank you, Amanda, and welcome everyone. And thanks for joining today's session on federal data infrastructure. So we'll explore some implementation considerations and current practices in federal government agencies. This presentation offers sort of a strategic overview and a case study. So hopefully, no matter how much you know about this subject already, you'll gain some insights into how the government manages and operates data. So as a quick introduction, I'm David Fiorentini. I'm an adjunct lecturer here at Brown. I teach a class in the program called Data Engineering in Disguise, which is a really interesting blend of maybe some core technical data engineering concepts with some ethical qualitative considerations. Outside of Brown, I do work in the federal space as a full-time consultant over at the NIH, where my team develops and operates a set of data infrastructure and AI applications for the organization. Previous to that, I worked over at the FDA on sort of a data modernization effort. I work and live in the DC area and am extremely passionate about the federal data space. So definitely excited to be delivering this presentation today. So in terms of what we'll discuss, first we'll talk about why federal data infrastructure matters. Then we'll talk about some common components of federal data strategy. Then we'll talk about some of the top federal data initiatives and trends that we see today. Then we'll talk about some considerations that you might need to make if you're going to implement some of those trends technically. And then we'll look at a case study on online passport renewal, which you may have heard about potentially in the news. And then we'll wrap up from there. So first, why federal data infrastructure matters. So we've got on the screen some critical government functions. I think the key thing here is that data infrastructure isn't always just about the technology. It instead underpins a lot of the government functions that you see here. So justice system, emergency services, financial systems, national security, et cetera. And so you can think about 911 dispatch systems, VA health records, Social Security payments, TSA screening. These aren't just IT projects, but they're kind of public safety and can be national security imperatives. And while not all government functions are as maybe critical as the ones shown on the screen, in general, they're meant to serve the needs of the country and the people. And so, of course, it's really important that it's done right. Now, the federal government recognizes this importance and invests quite a bit in IT systems. So in 2025, the federal IT spend is at $102 billion with 13% year over year growth. Thing to note about that 13% is that outpaces general budget growth, which would suggest prioritization in this area by the federal government. On the right, we can see different agencies and their budgets, the top five IT budgets with Department of Defense with the highest. And while these top five do have the largest budgets, nearly all federal agencies are spending quite highly in this area just to kind of keep up. Now, part of the reason that so much investment is in federal IT and data is because of how much complexity there is. And so federal data faces complexity really at three levels. So organizationally, there's hundreds of agencies. Each agency has their own goals and priorities. Sometimes there might be overlapping missions as well. Secondly, from a data perspective, the federal government houses some of the most sensitive data there is across many different agencies. And so the bar for what might be considered secure would have to be potentially higher in this area than in the private sector. And in certain situations, um, it you kind of have to get it right, basically. And so finally, there's also complexity at the technical level. So keep in mind that some agencies still run systems, from the 1980s alongside modern cloud applications. And while it might seem clear to just, update these legacy systems, it's not always that easy. For instance, what if there are 10 systems that rely on that one legacy system, such that if you update the legacy system, now you have to update the 10 downstream systems? In addition, what if the legacy system works adequately for what you need it? These are kind of some important considerations that actually happen in the real world and ultimately contribute to kind of this overall level of complexity in federal data. So with this increase in complexity, agencies are adopting new ways of approaching that. And so we'll take a look at this through the lens of federal data strategy. So federal data strategy is actually a really multifaceted topic that could very well have its own presentation. But one thing I wanted to include here is kind of a typical federal data governance structure. So before 2018, data management was more implicit rather than explicit. So then what happened is the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act of 2018 made data governance more of a legal mandate, requiring chief data officer roles at most major federal agencies. And so you can kind of see the resulting three-tier accountability model on screen here that's pretty common in federal data agencies. So you have the agency heads that bear the ultimate accountability for data governance and compliance. And then you have the chief data officers that manage the data assets and drive strategy more day to day. And then you have governance boards that provide cross-functional oversight and policy implementation. And so the structure you can see on the screen is really meant to provide accountability for data governance and enable agencies to kind of come up with their own comprehensive and effective data strategies. I also want to note that this structure has also created kind of many career paths for data professionals in government, which might be of interest to maybe some of you listening in today. Now, what are these chief data officers kind of focused on when putting together their federal data strategy? So I've included a data lifecycle process here, composed of kind of 4 key steps. So first, we have collection and ingestion standards. And so this would be defining sources, pipeline architecture, data quality requirements, and metadata. Secondly, we have a governance and security framework, and that would be to establish access controls, compliance measures, and risk management. Third, you have analytics and insights. That would enable, evidence-based decision making and measures through analysis and visualization. And a lot of data scientists are particularly focused on that analytics and insights part. And then fourth, we have retention and disposal policies. And so that would ensure strategic archiving, secure deletion, and audit trails. And so each agency must develop their own strategy. And keep in mind, agencies are quite different from each other, so the strategy can differ as well. But many of these strategies are kind of aligned to a framework like this. Retention is an especially interesting one. The National Archives actually requires preservation of certain records, but at the same time, storage costs money. So there's sort of a balance there. As a data scientist or data professional in general, I think it's important to kind of understand all of these components, not just one in particular. And one thing that I think is really great about our program is that you really would look at all 4 of these stages in this cycle. All right, so a great strategy is one thing, but of course you need to implement it effectively. And so one major initiative in federal data is migrating infrastructure to the cloud. And so we'll talk about that next year. So first we'll talk about on-prem versus the cloud. And so this is actually a topic that's covered in my course, Data Engineering in Disguise. So we'll describe it here, and then we'll discuss through the lens of federal agencies on the next slide. And so as background, data can either be stored on premises or in the cloud. And so traditional on-premises infrastructure allows for kind of direct physical control over the system storing the data. And so it can be kind of cost effective, but usually for systems kind of with consistent resource needs. In addition, it's also used if there's kind of specific regulatory requirements that mandate physical separation of the data. But kind of some of the downsides, it does require upfront investment, and scaling kind of requires hardware procurement cycles. So that's kind of on-premises. Cloud infrastructure, by contrast, provides some more scalability and agility because an organization just pays for what they use rather than kind of maintaining peak capacity year-round, which is what you would have with an on-prem system. From a security perspective, it's kind of a double-edged sword here because on the one hand, with an on-prem system, you control the data more directly. But with cloud services, they do generally, cloud providers invest billions of dollars in security and have specialized security teams that maybe you wouldn't have if you had kind of your on-prem system. Um, of course, cloud providers are not perfect either. Actually, in the news today, if you read it, AWS had a big outage affecting a lot of different applications. Certainly, cloud is not perfect, and on-prem isn't either. In the private sector, the shift to cloud has really already taken place, I would say, due to some of the benefits that cloud services offer. In government, the shift has not been as immediate. And we generally see kind of hybrid approaches at nearly every agency, actually. So that would be keeping certain systems on premises while moving others to the cloud. And so kind of in my role at the NIH, I work with kind of multiple data systems and, some of it's on-prem, some of it's on the cloud, and it just kind of depends. Now, let's talk about it through a federal government lens. So over the past 5 years, we've seen a lot of growth in federal cloud spend. It's nearly doubled over the past 5 years, seeing about 14% average annual growth. Um, and so COVID really accelerated the trend in 2020, I would say. But it's not just COVID. There's also cybersecurity modernization, replacement of aging infrastructure. And so if they're replacing aging infrastructure, there's a good chance they're going to put it in the cloud. Um, and in addition, 8.3 billion out of, we were saying IT spend is about 100 billion. It's still a relatively small amount of total IT spend, so could increase as well. And so if you read the news sometimes kind of in the government space, you might see like major agencies like the VA and IRS kind of have multi-year cloud strategies that they've come out with. So that's particularly interesting. There are definitely some restrictions to using the cloud from a government perspective. So classified systems, law enforcement databases, some other systems may never fully migrate to the cloud just due to specific security or legal requirements. Now, cloud migration is a big trend, but there are also some kind of other initiatives I wanted to talk about as well. So here are some of the biggest federal data infrastructure initiatives and trends that you see in the market today. So first we have cloud migration, which we just discussed. And second, we have scaling AI solutions. And so this is obviously a huge area of emphasis and requires a lot, governance frameworks, bias testing, explainability. And so really AI adoption in the federal government could almost be its own conversation separate from this, but certainly a huge area of emphasis. Third, we have implementing zero trust security architecture. So we learned about this in my course as well. So zero trust, that embodies the principle of never trust, always verify. So it kind of assumes attackers are already inside your network or are trying to be, which means kind of you need to implement more stringent security protocols as necessary. And so the fourth, the challenging work of legacy system modernization and replacing kind of outdated systems. And so this is often very expensive, very complex, and sometimes not as visible as the other three. I would also mention some of these initiatives are interdependent, right? So you can't effectively do AI without cloud infrastructure, and it's hard to secure cloud infrastructure without implementing zero trust principles. And so each of these initiatives or trends kind of requires careful planning and resources. Now, despite the significant investment that we've talked about in these areas and there's definitely real challenges for federal data implementation. So I've got a few things to mention here. So in a survey, 83% of agencies found that they struggle with application migration. So that could be migrating from a legacy system to the cloud. It could be from Azure to AWS, from one environment to the other, really. And so that's a kind of an area that of struggle. I also found that around 30%, according to the GAO, around 30% of critical systems have been modernized since 2019. That number actually was lower before, so there definitely is progress in this area, but a lot of the critical systems that the government relies on are relatively old and legacy. Um, from an organizational perspective, there's definitely a number of challenges as well, and I think that this area is definitely less talked about. So first, the federal government faces skill gaps in modern technologies. So, genuinely, a genuine problem is, sometimes it's hard to hire, experienced cloud engineers, let's say, at government pay scales, and so that's a difficult challenge. In addition, budget cycles can constrain agility since multi-year projects don't fit neatly into maybe annual appropriations. And so that's a challenge no matter where you go in the technology space is being in an organization that may recognize that a lot of investment now might not reap benefits for a few years, but eventually it will. And so that's obviously going to be a challenge wherever you go. And then finally, there can be change management resistance. So some people do still have the mindset of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And so that's certainly something that exists today. Finally, strategically, there's challenges as well. So from a policy and compliance perspective, there are a lot of new frameworks that have come out, and we'll actually discuss on the next slide, but a lot of them are pretty new and dynamic. And then also there's the constant tension around the need to maintain legacy systems while investing in new approaches. A federal agency might already be spending a lot of money to keep the systems maintained that it already has. And so, getting the buy-in to invest a lot in something new can actually be quite difficult. So these are all real challenges without easy solutions, I'd say. Now, to help organizations navigate these challenges, we're seeing an emergence of compliance frameworks and standards. And so federal agencies must navigate kind of multiple frameworks. So FedRAMP for cloud security, HIPAA for health data, NIST frameworks that provide more foundational general guidance, and zero trust architecture principles as discussed previously. And so while not all of these standards are used in every situation, they're definitely some of the more common ones and certainly helpful when you need it. And so these standards often translate to sort of a multi-layered security approach as shown on the bottom. So secure cloud platforms as infrastructure, encryption for data protection, identity-based access controls for access management, and real-time monitoring, as opposed to maybe periodic audits. And so each layer kind of reinforces the others to create sort of a genuine bolstered defense. So yeah, compliance, sometimes is seen as kind of something that's overhead, but sometimes it really does help agencies handle their data responsibly and definitely gives them something to work off of as well. So definitely can be helpful. Now, I want to give an example of the outcomes of kind of what I think is a pretty strong data strategy. And so in particular, we'll talk about online passport renewal. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to include this is actually something I just went through myself recently. And I had a really positive experience with it. And it kind of inspired me to learn more about this process. And after looking into it, I thought it'd be a great example for this presentation. So for decades, passport renewal was manual and paper heavy. And so the process, citizens would have to mail in printed forms, physical photos, and checks. And so this paper intake was actually sorted by hand into physical bins, then manually routed to adjudicators who performed manual identity verification. And so this process, worked adequately for years, of course. But in 2023, there was sort of the post-COVID travel surge, if you remember, and it created, record demand that overwhelmed capacity. And so there was a lot of pressure to fix it because this is sort of a constituent services issue. So, members of Congress were hearing from frustrated travelers, for instance. And to top it off, there are legitimate security concerns and sort of a process like before where mail passports were even sometimes stolen from mailboxes. In addition to the number of passports issued has increased a lot over the past several years. I was looking at some statistics, and I think in the year 2000, it was around 7 million passports were issued every year. And now it's around 23, 25 million. So just a huge increase in the number of passports that have to be issued. So the problem here was clear. The demand for passport renewal couldn't really be met with this paper-based manual system. And so the solution launched last year in September 2024, and it enabled citizens to renew passports entirely digitally for the first time. And so they could complete the entire process, application, photo upload, and payment, of course, with 24/7 availability and no scheduling an appointment, right? And so did even some research. The photo upload even includes some automated quality checks to reduce rejections. Um, and it had integrated processing as well. And so from an infrastructure and technology perspective, it required some sophisticated components. And so the system uses microservices hosted in FISMA compliant government data centers. So FISMA is another government standard that we didn't get to, but it has to do with security. And the system also leverages login.gov for two-factor authentication. It combines encryption and some other security controls. And it was overall kind of fully compliant and secure. It kind of had the previous safeguards that it did in the manual process, but it was just quicker and more technology focused. Also included some real-time integrations with multiple systems. So for Social Security number verification, they integrated with the SSA, that's the Social Security Administration. For fraud detection, they integrated with LexisNexis, that's actually a private company. And then for address verification, they integrated with the Postal Service. So really interesting solution that they implemented here. They also did this in about 18 months, which actually is pretty fast, I would say. Yeah, so let's see how it worked out. So the results have been overwhelmingly positive, actually. In the first year, the digital system processed over 3 million renewals. The processing time dropped from 6 to 8 weeks down to just 4 to 6 weeks. And by the way, kind of during that peak COVID travel surge, it was up to 18 weeks backlog. So obviously a large reduction. User satisfaction is actually could be the most interesting. It jumped from 55% in 2023 to 94% positive feedback in this new online renewal process. And so operationally, the system reduced call center volume since people could check their status online, and it generated operational savings through less physical mail handling, storage, and scanning. And so, in research on this, the system is still learning. There are some edge cases like name changes and damaged passports that still require paper processing. And also, this is for passport renewals. It's not for the new passports. But overall, I think this demonstrates kind of some genuine measurable impact on citizen experience. And so in my experience, it was definitely seamless, user-friendly, and took a few weeks. So I definitely had a really good experience with it. All right. Now let's bring this all together. Three takeaways I wanted to discuss kind of from this presentation. First, federal data is extremely complex, spanning organizational, data, and technical dimensions. Second, agencies are making substantial investments and new approaches to address this complexity. And third, strong data strategies that encompass governance, lifecycle management, and security are essential to navigating these ongoing challenges. And I thought that the online passport renewal case study was a great example of an agency using a strong data strategy to help citizens with a service that they need. And so with that, I want to thank you all for listening and would be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thanks, David. Yes, if anyone has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A function. No questions, anyone? Okay. Well, if we don't have any questions, we can move on to, oh, looks like we have a question from Linda Clark. How did you get started in the field, David?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to talk about that. So I mentioned that I live in Washington, D.C., and so I moved here several years ago, and I think that's really where it started. And so I've always had an interest in the government, and I think like even in the case study, kind of helping citizens with their needs. And so moving to the area, I definitely felt like I wanted to work in this field. So I've always been really interested in technology and data, and especially the amount of data that is that our society is generating and needs to store. And I also have a passion for, in the public sector, developing systems that help people. And so kind of felt like this space was really able to kind of combine those two desires.
So we have another question that says, what would you see as some applications for data analytics in the foreign policy space?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't work in the foreign policy space, um, but I think so there's a few things. I mean, I've worked a little bit in generative AI right now, and so any situation in which there's a lot of text-heavy processes, generative AI is really good at that for unstructured data. So I think that potentially in foreign policy, whenever you're trying to understand kind of another country's policies and laws, obviously that's going to be really text-heavy, and obviously it's going to be a lot of content. And so I think you could potentially use generative AI to kind of streamline some of the understanding of that content. There's probably some other areas too, but I think like maybe understanding another country's laws, regulations to ensure that we're able to work with them effectively might be an area that could be helpful.
And then we have another question that says, any considerations for natural environmental impacts?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's from a few different angles. So when talking about the actual data infrastructure, um, that is something definitely to consider, particularly on the generative AI front, kind of what we're discussing at. Um, Obviously, there's water usage, there's other environmental impacts to using generative AI technology. Building out lots of data centers actually requires a lot of natural resources. So at the same time, there's kind of multiple ways to approach it. You could kind of continue in that direction, but try to lower environmental usage as much as you can. You could try to work in other areas to offset it. The thing that actually came to mind is actually, lots of areas within the federal government that are, focused on trying to reduce some of the negative effects on the environment. So there's a few considerations there. So I think it's a good question, especially when building out additional data infrastructure, as it can have negative effects. At the same time, there are innovations too that try to kind of reduce that or mitigate that.
Great. And then are there any examples of how generative AI has created problems in this space?
Yes, definitely examples of it. I think relying on generative AI too much without third-party verification is big. Um, I think I've seen in the news some systems that have implemented sort of policy compliance rules, but where the AI kind of made a decision without the human in the loop, which is kind of a framework where a human is there to verify the generative AI outcome. That's led to challenges. Um, so definitely two areas I would say is when there's not verification for a generative AI response, and kind of not ensuring human in the loop framework for technologies. But certainly there are areas that Gen AI has created problems, and there's probably also some ways to kind of mitigate those issues.
Thanks. And then how have you seen data infrastructure investments change across the different administrations?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So it is a tricky one to answer. I would say one good thing about data infrastructure is that it, it might be slightly less partisan from at least as things go than other areas. So ensuring security, scalability, systems that work well, definitely can be a little bit less exposed to policy. At the same time, it a little bit depends on the federal agency at hand. So I know there are certain federal agencies that are obviously going to be more exposed to kind of a new administration's priorities and focuses. I would say kind of in my work, I personally haven't really had that much kind of change across multiple administrations. But I think in certain agencies that it definitely can occur.
And then has the technical aspect of this field or the legal governance side helped you progress more?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Sometimes they bleed together. Like I would definitely say that if you have an interest in this field, kind of understanding both is going to be the most helpful. So I think that to kind of get into the field, the technical aspects of federal data are going to be kind of what maybe gets you in the door. But to kind of continue in that field and to progress and to kind of have more uh, focus and expand kind of what you're working on. I think understanding sort of the kind of the legal, more compliance focused aspects of it are really what's going to help you kind of in your career trajectory. But I would say both are really personally interesting to me. And I would say that maybe to get your foot in the door, technical might be more important, but to kind of as you progress, understanding kind of the governance aspect will help you.
Thanks. And the lucky part of this program is we cover both. So there's 4 technical classes and then 4 classes that are more focused on the governance and policy side. So we have a kind of a long 2-part question here in the Q&A about how different departments set minimum cybersecurity standards. And should the current cybersecurity standards and policies be raised or centralized for different uses of different departments?
An excellent question. So it's sort of the way it works right now is it's sort of a mix. There is guidance that occurs for all federal agencies, and there's also a lot of guidance at the agency level. The reason for that is kind of what I mentioned a little bit in the presentation, where a lot of agencies have very different missions and focuses, like completely different. And so there's going to be certain agency focus guidance that needs to be there. At the same time, being housed everything under the federal government, there are certain rules and governance that kind of applies to everyone. So I think kind of the way it works currently, where there's maybe guidelines from the top down to ensure that every federal agency is kind of following what they need to, but also understanding that certain agencies are going to have specific focuses and things that they need to include as well. Another thing to include is that certain agencies have much more sensitive data than others. And within certain agencies, certain groups are going to have much more sensitive data than others. And certain people are going to have, top secret clearance versus, no clearance. And so these are all like kind of considerations that need to be made. So it's a sort of super complex environment where it does kind of, require there to be kind of top level guidance as well as guidance individually at the agency level.
Thank you. And we have another question. It says, how can federal agencies balance the need for data sharing across departments with the requirements for data privacy and security when building a unified data infrastructure?
That's also a really good question because there are a lot of joint efforts between agencies where they need to work together. For instance, in the health space, I know NIH and FDA work together and CDC work together quite a bit. There's a lot of rules and regulations that have to go into data sharing, is particularly with sensitive data. So I think, yeah, it's kind of goes to, I'll just show this slide real quick. I don't know if I discussed it, but this slide right here, we have federal data. We have, some of the kind of key components of what government does here as well. So kind of setting policies in place to ensure that agencies are able to work together when they need to, without also ensuring that there's going to be any issues and that the strong security protocols that are in place kind of continue to be strong across, sharing among different agencies.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions right now. So this is the last call. If you have any questions for David. Okay. Thank you, David, so much. This was great. And this is kind of just a taste of what you might kind of learn about in this program. And so we are so thankful you all attended. We are going to hop into our little bit of program information. So if you aren't interested in hearing about that, that is fine. You can feel free to hop off now. And we will jump into the second part of the presentation. Okay, so taking a look at program format. The program is 100% asynchronous, meaning there are no times that you have to be logged on, but it is not self-paced. So there are 14 weeks in each semester, and there are 14 modules with weekly deadlines that you'll be accountable for. And then there are weekly optional synchronous sessions. So this is going to be an hour in the evening each week where you're able to get on Zoom with your faculty members and classmates to synthesize the information and have discussions about what you've been learning in the online courses the past week. These are optional. We've seen that about probably 3/4 of the students are attending them regularly. They are recorded and posted in Canvas. If you are not able to attend, you're still able to watch those. The program is 8 total courses, and we will dive into a little bit more information on each course specifically on the next slide. The program is designed for students to take 2 courses a semester over 4 consecutive semesters for a total of 16 months. We do have the opportunity to go part-time for all or part of the program. And once you are admitted, you would work with your academic advisor to develop a custom plan of study. As far as tuition goes, it is $7,500 a course, and we do offer merit scholarships of up to 50% of the tuition cost. When you submit your application for admission, you are automatically reviewed for these merit scholarships, and you'll receive a scholarship decision along with your admissions decision. And this is the standard course sequence that I mentioned in the last slide. We've designed this program, so that all of the courses kind of build off of each other as the program goes on, but then also the 2 courses that you're taking each semester also have some through lines. Um, so each semester, you're taking one technical class. So the top row are the 4 technical classes that you'll be taking. Technical Foundation for Data Science Success is going to get everyone up to the technical level that they're going to need to succeed in the rest of the classes. We have students that are coming from an undergraduate backgrounds in engineering, data, computer science. And then we also have people in this program that have English degrees or business degrees, and maybe their technical skills aren't as high. This class is going to get you there. So while there is some requirement of math knowledge and some prior programming knowledge, you do not have to be a data scientist to be admitted into this program. From there, you'll move. Actually, I'm sorry, the top row is not all the technical classes. Semester 2, the technical class is David's class, Data Engineering in Disguise. Then you'll move on to semester 3 to the Machine Learning class. And the last semester, you will be in an applied learning experience where you're able to take everything that you've learned throughout the program and create some sort of project that you'll work closely with a faculty member on. And then in terms of the policy courses, the first class you will take is a basic AI and policy ethics course. You will move into evidence-driven policymaking and take on a fairness and bias course, which is looking at fairness and implicit bias in different AI and how to, through a lens of racial justice. So this is going to be a really interesting way to apply that. And then the semester 4, the class is going to be advanced topics of AI governance. David, if you're still on, we have a question about what data engineering in disguise entails. If you want to maybe give a few more or a few details about that class.
Yeah, absolutely. So data engineering in disguise. So it's going to cover data architecture, data storage, data processing. And so at the same time, it's going to cover maybe some more kind of qualitative concepts that are kind of interwoven. So It's going to talk about privacy, bias, ownership, really through a data engineering lens. So I would say it's kind of a typical data engineering course, but with an extra focus on maybe some of those like ethical components.
Thank you. Okay. And then some online student highlights. So courses are accessible from anywhere, like I mentioned, through Canvas, which is our learning management system. There is that optional weekly synchronous session to support engagement, and that's available through Canvas and held on Zoom. Graduates of this program will be awarded a Master of Science degree, and it will not indicate that you studied online anywhere on your degree or transcript. A question we get asked a lot is if online students are able to attend commencement. And yes, the answer is of course. We would love for you to join us in Providence for commencement or for any other activities. But we also do offer a virtual ceremony for folks who are not able to attend. Kind of building off that, online students are just as much part of the Brown student community as our residential students. So you have full access to the university's resources, including our online library, our master's career services office, who offers a lot of one-on-one advising appointments and networking events and workshops virtually. Our student accessibility services, if you need any accommodations, they are there to help you with that. All online students are given access to a foundations and resource center when they are admitted, and this provides answers to a lot of frequently asked questions, gives guidance to different resources that you might need to use while you are a student here, and also a kind of a guide to different people you can reach out to for help or for questions. But you also have a dedicated support team. From the time that you start your application until the time you graduate. We have graduate recruitment coordinators who work with our applicants. And then we also have an advising coordinator who works with students when they're admitted into the program through the point of graduation. So they are there to help you register for classes, point you in the direction of resources around campus if you need academic help. They are there as kind of a guidepost for you. And now taking a look at the application checklist, this is what you will need to have a completed application. So all applicants are required to have a bachelor's degree from an accredited institution. They also need to have 2 years of professional experience prior to the start date. So this is going to be 2 years of full-time professional work experience, excluding internships. And you will need to submit your resume or CV in your application. You will also need to provide the contact information for 3 letters of recommendation. These can be professional recommenders, academic recommenders, or a mix of both, but we would prefer at least one that comes from a current or prior supervisor. We also require, in lieu of a personal statement, something called a work artifact. So this is going to be something that you have developed in the course of your employment that has to do with data, policy, or governance in some way. Along with that, you're going to submit a written statement that explains the project in more detail and then also connects that project to why you want to study in this program. You've probably gotten an understanding that this isn't a traditional master's in data science program. This is going to tie in that policy and governance side. So we're really want to see how that part ties into your career goals and your prior career. We do have some examples of successful work artifacts on our website. And if you reach out to our graduate recruitment coordinator, she is also able to share more information about your specific situation. Addition to that, we will need all of your transcripts from previous colleges and universities that you've attended. So even if you didn't get a degree, if you took credits there, we will need those transcripts. You can submit unofficial transcripts during the application process. And if you are admitted, you would then need to submit your official transcripts. Students who receive their degree outside of the US will be required to submit an international transcript evaluation for their application to be reviewed. We accept evaluations from WES, SpanTran, or ECE. And then for international applicants, if the language of instruction at your university was not English, you must also submit a for English test. So we accept both TOEFL and IELTS. And then there is a $100 application fee, but everyone that attended this webinar will receive an application fee waiver. In terms of upcoming deadlines, so we are currently accepting applications for our spring and fall semesters. The final application deadline for spring is going to be November 7th, so you still have a few weeks to get your applications in if you are ready to start in January. And we are also accepting applications for our fall semester, and the early application deadline or early action deadline for that is going to be March 15th. Okay, so now if we have questions about the program or the application process, it looks like we had a question about what level of math or programming experience is required. Linda, our program director, answered. One programming course. So Python is the preferred language, but if you have experience in R, others, that's fine. And you can take a Coursera course if you don't have that experience. If you also have tons of experience programming in your role, your professional role, but you don't have a college course that you've taken, there is an opportunity in the application to kind of explain your background. And in terms of math, we're looking for a semester of statistics or college level algebra. Um, and again, if you haven't taken a college level stats course or it's been a long time and you feel like you need a refresher, you're able to take that in a Coursera type course, a local college, online, whatever, is easiest for you. We will accept that. And do you accept any transfer courses? We do not accept transfer courses right now because of the way the program was designed, so that there is kind of each class grows on each other or builds on each other. And additionally, because the courses are so specific to the policy and governance, it's unlikely that courses from elsewhere would be meeting all of the learning objectives for these classes. Okay, do we have any other questions? I'm going to put this screen up while we wait and see if anyone has any other questions. If you want to speak to a graduate recruitment counselor or you have a question that's a little more personal in nature and you don't feel comfortable asking here, please feel free to email us at onlinemasters_admissions@brown.edu. And we can set up an appointment for you to talk to Melanie, our amazing graduate recruitment counselor. You can also take a picture of this link if you'd like to directly schedule some time with her. But thank you all for attending this session today. It was great to have you here and hear a little bit more from David. And we are excited to hopefully see your application come through soon. Thank you all.